Legacy is legally defined as a gift by will, particularly money or property left after someone has passed. Pat Chappelle owned the first black theatrical venue and ran the first black-owned traveling show. The show was so successful, it birthed legends like Arthur Happy Howe, Ma Rainey, Bessie Smith, Tim Moore, and several others. With the help of his show, the Rabbit's Foot Company made Pat Chappelle an extremely wealthy man before his death at the age of 42. Often called the pioneer of Negro vaudeville, Chappelle was the only black man to fully operate a traveling show made up of all black entertainers. Unfortunately, a lawsuit over the company he built was ignited, and after his untimely death, causing a rift between family members. The legacy he worked so hard for was tarnished after his company was sold and left out the family that built everything they had from the ground up. Meet Pat Chappelle. Here's the story of the original Chappelle Show before Dave. Born in Jacksonville, Florida, to two former slaves who originally located in Newberry County, South Carolina, Patrick Henry Chappelle came from a family that was made to make history and change the world. Pat's father and uncle worked on house construction in Florida and had several political positions in Jacksonville. Another one of Pat's uncles, Julius Caesar Chappelle, also worked with them, but eventually moved to Boston, Massachusetts. There, he became one of the first black Republicans in Boston. Back then, Republican values resembled the Democrats, as the Republican Party was founded by abolitionists. The name Chappelle bears a ton of history. Obviously, we're aware of the comedian Dave. His great-grandfather, William David Chappelle, was born a slave and soon became an educator, served as president of Allen University, and was a bishop at the African Methodist Episcopal Church. His son, William David Chappelle, Jr., was a physician and surgeon who opened up the People's Infirmary at a time where segregation prevented many blacks from having access to health care. Pat Chappelle isn't related to the Chappelle family that we all know, but it's extremely noteworthy that someone who bears the same surname still contributed to black history at a time where history of black folks were not documented. As a child, Pat gravitated towards music, learning how to play the guitar and piano, but was especially gifted when it came to playing the banjo. After the 4th grade, he left school to participate in traveling bands, playing the guitar. Eventually, he caught the attention of Benjamin Franklin Keith, a vaudeville theater owner who offered him bookings in Boston, New York, and Florida. Around the age of 29, Chappelle would return to Jacksonville and began organizing his first traveling show called the Imperial Colored Minstrels. They also went by Famous Imperial Minstrels. With his brothers James and Louis, he opened the Excelsior Hall, which became one of the first black-owned theatrical venues in the South. Extremely popular with a capacity of 500, it quickly became known for the whiskey it sold. In August 1898, he stood outside the venue and was attacked, nearly beaten to death by a mob of men who blamed him for dosing patrons inside with knockout drops, a drug in liquid form that often added to drinks to cause unconsciousness. A New York Times article from that same year printed a headline that read, "Knockout Drops for Troops." Over 18 men picked up insensible in Jacksonville, a saloon keeper roughly handled. The article went on to describe that some men were left lifeless while others were nearly screaming with pain and writhing in convulsions. A number attacked Pat Chappelle, keeper of a Negro bear, alleging that it was done in his saloon. Only the quick work of Major Harrison, Provost Marshal, in ordering out a reserve guard saved Chappelle's life. He was terribly beaten and kicked. The military and civil authorities are making a determined effort to ascertain who used the knockout drops and will punish them to the fullest extent if discovered. New York Times, August 20th, 1898. Of course, that wouldn't be the end of Chappelle's struggles. While building his brand, just a year later, in 1899, he was involved in an argument with the landlord of the Excelsior Hall, J.E.T. Bowden, who was also the mayor of Jacksonville. The disagreement caused Chappelle to close his theater and move to Tampa, where he opened up a new vaudeville house with R.S. Donaldson, another black entrepreneur. In order to build his new theater, Chappelle took the tiled floor from the Jacksonville location, but eventually had to return them after a lawsuit was filed. Despite the initial rough beginnings, the new theater was called the Buckingham Theater Saloon and featured an ethnically diverse audience. A newspaper titled The Freeman reviewed the venue saying, "The house is crowded to doors every night with Cubans, Spaniards, Negroes, and white people. Although this was a venue made by blacks for minorities, everyone stopped by. Of course, they weren't exempt to the Jim Crow laws that dominated the era. The Tampa Morning Tribune printed, "Special attention will be shown to white visitors." Business for the Buckingham Theater was going so well, Chappelle and Donaldson announced the grand opening of a second vaudeville platform, the Mascot Theater Saloon, also located in Tampa. This second location was just as successful as the first, as reports from both places were covered heavily, with one review claiming these theaters have proven themselves to be miniature gold mines. Doing their best to continue the momentum they built up, Chappelle and Donaldson wanted to bring out one of, if not the greatest aggregation of Negro talent ever on the road. With the help of writer Mr. Frank Dumont, it led Chappelle's greatest known accomplishment, A Rabbit's Foot. According to the book Ragged But Right, Black Traveling Shows, Coon Songs, and the Dark Pathway to Blues and Jazz. On May 19, 1900, Chappelle and Donaldson ran an ad in the Freeman paper. It requested 60 colored performers, only those with reputation, male, female, and juvenile of every description, novelty acts, headliners, etc. for our new play, A Rabbit's Foot. We will travel in our own train of hoteliers and will exhibit under canvas musicians that double right quick. Can use a good pickaninny band. All the members of this show must be good dressers on and off the stage, and must be ladies and gentlemen. The expectations for A Rabbit's Foot were sky high. Chappelle wanted the play to compete with big-time shows that were held up north. In order to ensure its success, he did business with prestigious agencies, first-class theaters, and A-list performers. This would come back to bite him as he soon found himself involved in a contract dispute with some of the performers. Not only this, but their bandmaster abandoned the play, which led Chappelle's partnership with Donaldson come to an end. A Rabbit's Foot somehow opened on schedule. Originally intended to be a musical comedy, the play took the form of a minstrel show. Unfortunately, the play was shut down just 4 weeks after its debut on an account of poor business. Chappelle then moved back to Tampa to work at the Buckingham to regroup. Just a year later, he launched A Rabbit's Foot Company's second season, which was considerably more successful than the last run. A year after that, its third season debuted in Florida and took them on a tour all around the South to Georgia and Alabama, including Birmingham, Ozark, Troy, Union Springs, Phoenix City, Opelika, Talladega, and Anniston. The show became the first black traveling vaudeville show. Chappelle's brothers James E. Chappelle and Louis W. Chappelle came on the road to help by organizing a small vaudeville circuit. By 1902, it was reported that Chappelle brothers had full control of the African-American vaudeville business and was able to provide 12 to 14 weeks of employment to at least 75 performers and musicians each season, all of whom were black. Chappelle spoke on the show's continued success. When we consider that all other tent shows are playing to 25 and 15 cents, and we're charging 35 cents and filling the tent, why the Rabbit's Foot must be a lucky charm. We are getting money, and forgive all the hard knockers for now. They see they cannot keep a good man down. The slogan for A Rabbit's Foot was "Too Good for a Tent," referring to the tent shows that remained popular throughout the mid to late 19th century, that housed medicine and vaudeville shows when full-time playhouses weren't yet supported. Shows that were held in Atlanta and Memphis were so large, they were held in theaters despite its categorization as a tent show. In recognition of this, Chappelle took out an advertisement in the Freeman to celebrate, claiming that he accomplished what no other Negro has done. He has successfully run a Negro show without the help of a single white man. From the Razorbacks up to the manager, each and every member is colored. Our success is nothing short of phenomenal, especially when you considered that we are all Negroes and are here in the heart of the South. Not one pale face among us, even our advance agents are colored. It's reported that A Rabbit's Foot Company would average more than $1,000 a week while spending around $500 to $700 to produce. I cleared $12,000 this past season and only worked 6 months. I have an income that will keep me comfortable the balance of my days. Pat Chappelle. The show continued to grow, and at its height, A Rabbit's Foot Company would travel to as many as 16 states in a single season. Large crowds would show up for Chappelle's vaudeville shows. even during the yellow fever scare in the early 1900s. This kind of vaudeville shows were considered authentic because they featured black performers instead of white performers in blackface. This act was called Clean Negro Vaudeville. Aside from producing shows, Chappelle also created an all-black baseball team stationed in Jacksonville. The team would tour with the company and played the local team in every city a Rabbit's Foot visited. Since the 1905 to 1906 season, there was a baseball team in connection with the company for at least the next 15 years. In spring 1906, Chappelle developed and launched a second minstrel tent show called the Funny Folks Comedy Company. Pat's brother, Mitchell Chappelle, would manage. To make sure this new show was a success, he recycled some of the biggest performers from a Rabbit's Foot roster. The next year, Chappelle claimed he had made over $50,000 in 5 years. Now with 2 successful shows running under his belt, the Freeman reported, Mr. Chappelle has no equal when it comes to managing these kinds of shows. He has proven to be the black P.T. Barnum when it comes to the success of a Negro show. The comparison to P.T. Barnum is something that Chappelle would hear throughout his entire career. Barnum was a circus founder who created the production that would become the greatest show on earth. Instead of putting the money he earned into nice cars, clothes, and houses, Chappelle considered himself to be a man of commercial characteristics. He put his money in real estate. In 1908, a railroad carriage that was used to tour the acts burned to the ground in North Carolina while several performers were asleep. The fire was caused after one of the horses kicked over a gas tank near a cooking stove. Some performers lost all their clothes and belongings. Chappelle immediately ordered a new carriage so the show could go on. The incident cost Chappelle nearly $10,000. When the 1909 to 1910 season ended that March, just 3 months later, it was reported that Chappelle had been indisposed for the last few months and under doctor's advice to take rest. When August came around, Chappelle was still ill. Despite this, he was still somewhat involved in the planning of the new season. One of Chappelle's main complaints were that the northern-based vaudeville shows were getting the preferential treatment in their theatrical papers. Despite this conflict, the new season debuted in September 1910. With the declining unexplained health of Chappelle, the season did not go without other problems. One of the cars used for touring engulfed in flames, and sadly, this was the 4th time since 1902 that a Rabbit's Foot Company car had been destroyed by fire. Chappelle and all the performers lost everything they possessed. As the new season, 1911 to 1912, was approaching, Chappelle would have to make an announcement that changed the entire course of a Rabbit's Foot Company and his career. That August, Chappelle said publicly, "A Rabbit's Foot will not go on the road this season, as formerly advised on account of my continued illness. My physician advised me that the strain would be too much for me, so all parties holding contracts will kindly consider them canceled. And if life lasts and my health improves, I will be pleased to book all parties for my company for the season of 1912. Just 2 months after that announcement, Chappelle died on October 21st, 1911 in Tampa. He was survived by his widow, Rosa Chappelle. The couple had no children. Rose remarried Samuel Decatur McGill, who eventually became known as a lawyer in a case that overturned a conviction of 4 innocent black men that were accused of killing an elderly white man in Florida in 1940. Shortly after Pat Chappelle's death in 1911, brothers Louis W. and James E. began a lawsuit against Rosa McGill and her husband, S.D. McGill, claiming that because they were the surviving members of Chappelle Brothers, they were entitled to the personal property and real estate that Pat accumulated throughout his career. The brothers challenged by the claim that the tropes taken out by Pat were managed and conducted by him, and him only, which the court supported. All of Pat Chappelle's estate, business interests, and a $10,000 insurance policy was left to Rose and her husband. After the death of Chappelle, a Rabbit's Foot Company came under the ownership of a man named Fred Swift Wolcott, a white veteran manager of black minstrel shows. Chappelle's widow, Rosa, had remarried and sold the company in 1912. Now that same year, Wolcott's Rabbit Foot Company made its debut. It wasn't long before Wolcott began advertising the production as a minstrel. Interesting enough, during Chappelle's reign as manager, he never used the terminology, which seems to have come from a conscious effort. Soon, the company became known as F.S. Wolcott's Original Rabbit's Foot Company, or F.S. Wolcott's Original Rabbit's Foot's Minstrels, completely undermining the original production of Chappelle put on himself. He even went so far as to run an advertisement describing the show as the greatest colored show on earth. A rabbit's foot company was no longer ran by blacks for blacks. Wolcott held the company for 38 years until he sold it in 1950. It was sold again in 1955 and based in Louisiana in its final years. According to Mississippi Blues Trail, the company's final performers were in 1959. Pat Chappelle died one of the wealthiest black men in Jacksonville, a legacy that should have developed over generations. According to Mississippi Blues Trail, the company's final performance was in 1959. Pat Chappelle died one of the wealthiest black men in Jacksonville, a legacy that should have developed over generations.